Hey guys, this is Valde from Moji here. Danish Counter-Strike is one hell of a drug, but so is Thorin's YouTube channel.
Right, I'm here for another one of my donated discussions. If you've listened to any of the last 5 to 6, Matt here has been on a lot of them, and obviously it's his prerogative to set the table. So what we're going to start with, what we're going to start talking about today, Matt?
Well, I kind of wanted to talk about like the HooXi saga.
Oh, let's do it.
When you interviewed HooXi on like a talk to Thorin, like when he was leading with the Copenhagen team, for his like interview with G2 essentially. And I like.
I think it was a snake and batter. I think he came on snake and batter with me and Maui.
I think it was like even earlier than that, like while he was in Copenhagen Flames, I think.
No, it's before he joined G2, I believe. I think it was when it was like maybe rumored he was going to. I think I know what you're talking about. It was like 2 years ago, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it was just you and him because I don't remember Maui on it, but whatever. So when he was talking about like his style and like what he did, and like it seemed like he would fit Nico's role as like the guy who can't be IGL'd because he was not stratting and stuff, and like he seemed like a nice guy and the vibe for the G2 team. But like my question is like, how did he last so long with being such a problematic figure in the scene, and like, is it justified that he got this much time?
Okay.
And like, who were the other IGLs G2 could have taken way back before they swapped the roster, like before Animosity and such? And I guess like the idea is like I guess like could G2 have built like a better team with Nico's problem as being like hard to IGL or hard to coach?
Here's the problem I have is I feel like some of the narratives have gotten too out of control. Like, first of all, as far as I've heard, Nico isn't hard to coach or IGL. It's more the other way around. It's more like maybe he just doesn't appreciate certain IGLs or maybe even coaches. I don't know. I've actually never heard from teammates that like he's a problem teammate or an arsehole or annoying, you can't play that. As far as I know, that's not true at all. But the bigger issue is if you look at his teams, G2 and FaZe, you do notice they've basically had, for my money, like 2 great IGLs ever join these teams, like Alexi B and Carrigan. That's it. Mm-hmm. If you look other than that, it does seem like, aside from those 2 people who you notice are the 2 best IGLs that Nico's ever had, he has a lot of fucking whack IGLs over his career in both teams. In FaZe, they had all those weird ones where the old boomers, Neo, Adren, all came and stood in and then became like the fucking like IGL for 2 months or 3 months each, if you remember that weird saga back like in 2019, etc. And then obviously now in G2 you had this period where they got Alexi B, but then they only gave him 6 months and booted him. And the reason why that always seemed so unfair to me is because that was also the very first 6 months of Monacy playing as a tier 1 pro. So basically HooXi gets to look like a genius because Monacy played better with HooXi than with Alexi, but we can't ever really know how much of that is like, I mean, the first 6 months, understandably, you expect the pro to be at his worst. He's probably going to get better over time. And then the other factor is, if you remember...
He also had Jax, too. Right?
Yeah, that's also the worst part, unfortunately. Is because Alexi B had Jax, but then HooXi got to have JKS. I mean, without JKS, there would have been 0 titles. So I don't even know what comparison we're doing at that point in time. But the worst part is, Matt, unironically, and I don't just say this because Na'Vi won the major. I always was an Alexi B stan. People know that. I think if they had essentially just changed Jax for JKS, but kept Alexi B, because remember, the third component everyone forgets is that was also when Extaz, as the coach, left around the same time Alexi B was kicked. Yeah. And then in came that Swanee guy, who, by the way, doesn't ever seem like he was a full coach. It just seems like he was like a demo analyst type guy and probably did like the basics of coaching, So to me, the saddest thing is I actually think if they'd essentially just only changed coach and anchor player in this sense, I actually think they could have been even more insane with Alexi B, mate. I think if you look at that lineup and imagine a lineup, even in CS2, would have to like, even in CSGO rather, would have to take Monacy now. Just remember how good Monacy got, like even in his first year. Nico was obviously mega back then. You remember he still used to be like a top 10, top 5 player on HLTV each year. Hunter was pretty good back there. If you remember, he used to be sort of like a 1.15 type rating player most events. And then JKS would have been there along with Alexi. I think that lineup could have been amazing, mate. Like, I think Kassad said this in the past, but I know people think we're saying this to hate on HooXi, but I actually think that lineup on paper could have like an era or something, mate. Like that lineup could win everything. I'm not saying it would, but it could. It's certainly a really spicy one and obviously now I think people will be more receptive to that idea since they obviously have seen what Alexi B does in Na'Vi, in my opinion, with even worse players than in that lineup I'm talking about. Like, I think he works with very little talent in Na'Vi, but you see the results. He's won all these championships, right? So the problem with the HooXi angle is this. I'm not sure who it is who hates on HooXi's IGLing, because here's the weird thing, mate. I've never thought he sucked as an IGL. To me, I just think G2 should only ever essentially have like top 5 IGL, top 3 IGLs in the world or something. You know, I think they're that good a team. And if you've got people like Modesty, it's probably justified to spend and get the super team while you've got like maybe the best player in CS. So essentially, I don't think he was a fraud, mate. I don't think he was like a bomb. So as far as I know from internally, I've talked to their team many times over the last year or so. They all did tell me he was a hardworking guy and he actually did like come up with strats and he had a playbook and he had a good attitude as an in-game leader. So actually, I think that makes a lot of sense as to why he was able to stick around for so long. Like essentially, there's no problem that would cause like an Eco to be upset, I think. And obviously they were winning. Like remember, within that span of like what? I think within the span of about 8 months, they won those 3 tournaments. You remember there was like the Blast at the end of 2022, and then Katowice would have been around like February or something. And then I think Cologne's usually around, I think that year it was maybe August, but it's usually around July, August. So within a decent span of time, you had won 3 big tournaments. So I also do think, if you remember my shows, it used to go like this. Kassad was against HooXi because, I mean, people never give him this credit, but he obviously knows people inside of G2, so maybe he heard things that he thought he was overrated or something. Maui was sort of in favour of HooXi because early on he just thought that style could work, and he was right. And then I was sort of in the middle where I was like, I don't mind doing it, but at the same time, I'd obviously rather, and this gets to the last part of your question, I'd rather you either went for like an already established legendary IGL, so like a Glaive, someone like that, or an XEB back then. Or the other angle to me would be you spend your money by gambling on the up-and-coming IGL. So if you remember back then, first of all, there's 2 ways we can do this. You can either do when they got HooXi or when they stopped winning. When they got HooXi, mate, almost everyone was available. Like, think about that. Since they got HooXi, you've had how many people? Like, Snappy's changed teams, Cadian's changed teams, Kixon's changed teams, Shuhi's changed teams, Nitro's changed. There's a lot of players changed teams since then. Okay. So the HooXi one is way, way back. But if we're going after HooXi, let's say like more like when they started losing in CS2. Dude, there's still quite a lot of people in CS2. Like again, they just sat by while a lot of those names I just mentioned got bought up and signed and all the rest of it. So I don't know. And also, the other problem I have is it's not like they waited and then, we just have to wait till Snacks. Signing Snacks sounds like you just wait till the worst time ever. Nobody's available. Yeah. You know, so basically that one's, put it this way, if I gave this perception, I hope it's not me, I would imagine it's other people on my content. If they gave the perception that HooXi's like a complete bomb and is like a fraud, I don't think that was ever true. I think that's too far if someone gave that impression. To me, it's more like, I always said he was right on the border of like, he looked like he was almost good enough to be in that team when they had really good players. But for me, essentially, the best analogy I would give is this. I don't think HooXi would be very good with the players Alexi B currently has. I think he would struggle if he had like lesser talents and didn't have stars. So I just personally thought a lot of what people were giving him his credit for in G2 was more like having amazing players at all positions, which doesn't mean he does nothing, but it means that like his same system, as it were, wouldn't work if you, I mean, as you saw, dude, you took out just JKS and made Hunter worse. The system looked half as good, didn't it?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts for them? I mean, you watched some of these games. Did you see a difference in the time he was with G2?
I mean, I just watched the major. I don't have like enough.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah,
no, that's all good.
So I just know like the VP stuff is just ridiculous. When they beat VP because of that drop, and HooXi was like the reason like he missed a bunch of shots, and Maui made a big deal about that. And like everyone keeps saying like HooXi just isn't fragging enough.
Oh, he's a trash fragger, yeah.
Yeah, if you have the teammates around him can do the fragging at that point. So I guess, yeah. And like when you interviewed him, it seemed like he knows what he's doing with IGLing, but like there's just so much negative like vibe around the community.
I mean, the
grows.
problem he has is this as well, mate. You have to remember he's in a really, really tough scenario because since he has both Monacy, who at the moment is the best player, and then Nico, who's like an all-time great player who's still capable of accessing like top-level form, for both of those players, you have to win the major, mate. Like even coming second or top 4 is not cool anymore. So the problem HooXi has is in any normal team that's not like a top 3 team in the world, he actually probably is good enough. Like the results would be fine, but like. Even though those results are fine for HooXi, they're not fine results for Nico and Monacy, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, put it this way, to give you it in league terms, if someone's the shot caller or the coach of Chovy, yeah, for that court player, or if I'm assuming this in the past would have been a jungler or a support, if that was for that player or that coach, for them to come second in LCK or like top 8 at Worlds, that's pretty good. It's not a bad result, right? But we know that if you're Chovy, you're supposed to win everything. Like actually, second place might not even be good enough for you. You get the comparison?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in this analogy, like, I mean, you could even use the same case. Like some people did think maybe Peanut wasn't doing a good job enough shot call for Chovy. The thing is, Peanut was still fabulous. It's just Chovy was win or bust with that guy. So yeah, I would say that those are my thoughts on that topic. Something else you want to move on to?
Yeah, just
some other angle.
Briefly on G2. When G2 played against, no, this is way early. Sorry. So when G2 played against Navi at that major, where Navi like won every series, and they played in the final, but that G2 team. How did they do that? Because they didn't seem like they had a whole lot of strength at that roster, right? It was just Nico and Hunter. That was Nexa and Jackson, someone else.
I have brain cancer right now trying to figure out what era I'm even in, like what year am I in this conversation?
It's like 2 years ago. So Navi won the major with Simple's first major.
Oh, right. You mean before HooXi, right? That was when they had Nexa, yeah. Oh, right. There's the PGL Stockholm one, the one I worked, yeah.
Yeah, the Stockholm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, how did G2 get to the final, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good question. Put it this way, I actually think that one tournament is so fucking unfair if you're Nico, mate. Like, his problem was, if you remember, Navi won that major without dropping a map, and like that team was the one where Bit was insane, and they had Electronic, and then Simple was also doing like 1.45 rating for the event or something. So essentially, like, I don't know if almost anyone in history could have beaten that Navi team. Meanwhile, if you saw how G2 actually did play, right, on paper, I actually think G2 was supposed to go out in the semi-finals of that tournament. When they got to the semis, the heroic team they played actually did look better than them in general, and it looked like they outplayed them for most of the series. But then on the third map, which by the way, no one's ever rewatched this, go back and watch the map 3. It's Inferno of the PGL Stockholm semi-final between Heroic and G2 Esports, and it is fucking mega, mate, because Nico just goes absolutely supernova, basically. He just like hard carries almost single-handedly G2 through. I mean, funnily enough, actually next to him wins a few clutches. Like, it's fucking mega. Like, it's essentially off individual play. But the problem was, when they got to the final, G2 was never supposed to beat Navi in that final. Like, I actually think Heroic would have made for a better final. It could have been a 3-mapper, you know. So the sad thing about that period was that was when Nico himself was like really insane. So back then, like, Nico was insane. Hunter was pretty good. Nexa actually wasn't bad, by the way. In that scenario, he was the IGL and he was in different spots than he was in this most recent G2 rework. And then Amanek and Jax, if you remember, were like, it's like between the two of them, they could sort of fill in the supportive roles, as it were. Like, Jax was more of like the hard entry, the bait, and then Amanek was more of like the general support player / anchor type player, if you remember. So I actually thought that wasn't a bad squad. The problem they had there was it was obviously underpowered because Amanek had to AWP, even though he's sort of like a secondary AWPer. So yeah, that's another one where. And Nexa was kind of like, he was funny enough, he was more in the HooXi school himself. Like, it wasn't a bad IGL, but he wasn't like great enough that it looked like he's definitely the right player. So I actually think that one run was just largely off Nico being really insane. Like, I think that was one of the best tournaments I've ever seen him play, mate. He was really good.
Yeah. All right.
And people forget in CS2, it's not like he's bad. He's just sort of like, let's say like 85% of what he was in CSGO. People really forget, dude, how good he was those last few years. Like, when we came back from the online era, I think Nico just like cooked for like 2.5 years, mate. He was really fucking good. He's probably like, if not the best rifler, he's like, the second best rifler for the whole time period. He was really good.
Yeah.
He hasn't been as good in CS2, unfortunately.
Yeah. That's what I've been hearing from the content and stuff.
Yeah. He's still good, but he's just not as good. I mean, obviously, when you get to that level, any drop-off is going to be noticeable.
Yeah. And then just briefly at the end of G2, like, how do you think them as an org with CS2 are like dealing with the current timeline and like the team. And
that's interesting, because that's the funny thing that a lot of people don't take into account, actually, Matt, which is if you listen to a lot of my talk shows in CS, have you ever noticed how everyone else just looks at player moves as if like you can definitely keep the other 4 players? Do you know what I mean? They just go like, oh, so I'd replace HooXi with this person, or I'd replace Nexa with this person. And one of the factors they never seem to mention, but I almost go out of my way to mention every time I mention G2 this year, is, bro, people have to remember that story from late last year where Nico was going to join Falcons.
Yeah.
Because the implication of that is so crazy that I still feel like other people haven't actually like processed it yet, bro. That means G2, the org, was fine with Nico leaving. Because remember, at the exact same time that the rumor was that the negotiation was going on, and it was going on, by the way, that was when G2 came out and made that weird statement where, remember, they were about to sell Nico, and they just came out and made a public statement that said, Monacy is not available for any amount of money. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, what's weird about that is what you've actually just signaled there, if you think about it, Matt, is I'm fine, you can have Nico, just pay the price, but we're not selling you Monacy. And in fact, we're going to tell everyone in the world publicly we're not selling Monacy. So already that implies a lot of things that I don't think people ever stop and think about. Like, people do still act as though this is FaZe Clan and they'll do whatever Nico says. Like, that's not even implied to me. Like, Nico could have been gone. I've also even heard he could have been in a different team this year, and that there was teams out there trying to get him and get Monacy. Similarly, like, even though they said we're not selling Monacy for any amount of money, right? Well, that's already really suspicious, right? Because you don't ever have to make that statement publicly, bro. You can just say no privately. So the problem is you have to ask yourself, why would you say that? Now, a naive interpretation would probably be you say that so that everyone knows what you've just said. He's not available. I take that a bit more cynically, mate. I take saying that publicly as what you really mean is, I don't want to sell Monacy. If I can, I'm going to keep him. So if you want to buy him, he's going to be really expensive. Really? I take that to be what that statement says. Like, if I had to rephrase that into a more literal phrase, it would probably be like, if you remember, the story goes that Spirit was able to buy Shiro for something like 1.5 million roughly, and then supposedly Electronic to VP was something like 1 million or whatever, you know, right? If you think of that sort of number, I would just say you may as well have reframed bear in mind, everyone's available if you have enough money. I would say that statement's probably more something like this, Matt. If anyone wants Monacy, it's $3 million or something crazy, or 2 million or 2.5 or something, you know. I think it's more like if you want him, you're going to have to go absolutely crazy and break the bank. And so the reason I bring this up is it was implied to me behind the scenes. That's what actually fucked G2 and CS2, is that they thought Nico was going. So instead, in their minds, right, Nico's gone, so we need to replace him. What we're going to do? So then what they did was they were getting Nexa in, because the premise at the time was, who even knows how long Monacy's here? So what we'll do is we'll build around Hunter, who, by the way, to be fair, had been like a HLTV top 20 player the last few years. So what we'll do is we'll pivot, we'll build around Hunter, and then here's where it gets interesting, mate. Because remember, the guy who is the GM of G2 used to be in that team called Crazy, like 4 or 5 years ago, with Hunter and Nexa. No, Hunter and Nexa, mate. And he signed Nexa to replace, in theory, Nico here, but then it turned out on JKS, but then it turned out that like Nico came back last minute. It's why at the time Nico actually did say in an interview something like Nexa would have joined even if I'd have left or something weird comment, because people thought again that the Nexa angle was on Nico as opposed to Pekka, the GM, and Hunter here. So essentially, as far as I can tell, mate, it seems to me like G2 this entire time in CS2 has had to constantly play the game of transfer market as if at any moment Nico and Monacy could just leave. So that's why I think they've made what look like very weird moves. I even think personally that's why the 2 moves they've made now seem so weird, because I think some of these moves are with the world where, like, for example, if Nico just leaves you in 2 months, maybe actually Malbs moves in Nico's spots and then it's perfect for him. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of what's fucked them is that they're sort of in the no man's land of like, look, if Nico decides to stay, you have to try and work with him. But you already thought he'd gone. Maybe it was implied on the rumours 2 or 3 months ago that Monacy's, as they've been losing, has been seriously thinking about leaving, and he's potentially been, it was implied, like back channeling to some of the Russian orgs. So I get the feeling, personally, I think this is the last season for this lineup. That's why why I don't go too crazy over the Malbs Snacks signing. I think essentially the management, this is probably the last time period, and I think after this, it either works and you win the major and maybe you can keep most of the players, or I think after this next major at the end of this season, so it's the end of the year, I think actually it won't even matter whether G2 wants to or not. I think at that point, like, Modesty will leave, in my opinion. That's just my take. It's pure speculation. I haven't spoken about anything, but it's just my vibe for where the team seems to be at.
Yeah. So briefly on the GM of G2.
By the way, we can talk about this topic if you want. There's no briefly. You can just keep going as much as you want. So go on. Yeah, what next? Go.
So the GM, does he have a Balkan bias to this area? Because I know like Maui said like they would maybe build around Hunter if they were rebuilding, but bring in like Malbs and Snacks, there's no real like nationality there. So like do you have any idea on like
I don't believe that's a thing. No. Like here's the thing. I have heard in the past, more just like spitballing, mate. Look, the real problem is this, right? In a world where you have Nico when he's really good, like when Nico's actually like, a top 5, top 10 player in the world, he's obviously a fucking massive player to have. When you have him, and then you think about how good Hunter was at one point in CS2, like, mate, most of that time period after the online era, like I said, he was like the 16th best player in the world or something. So when you have 2 top 16, 17 players in the world as your rifle core, right? And then if you remember, Nexa wasn't bad back then. And then the key thing was, along came Madden from Montenegro, right? So suddenly you've got 4 players from that region you could have. The problem at the moment is you wouldn't have a 5th, right? You'd need like an AWPA, essentially. So the main issue you'd have if you wanted to make an all-Balkan team is there's no AWPA right now that you'd obviously take in. So I would say it's more like when you have 3 or 4 players that would be an obvious fit if you did want to, you're just going to think about it like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if one day we could play together? Because in that scenario, notice what you're doing there is you're making a team that actually could be like still world class. It could still be a top 10 team in the world. You're not making some like big clan where it's like, if it goes badly, we're going to be 22nd in the world or something. So I think that's where everyone gets this idea that they're trying to recruit Balkan players. I don't think that's the case, mate. I think the reason they recruited Nexa, first of all, he wasn't top of their list. Like I've heard there was 3 or 4 people who were trying to get before that. And then secondly,
we were just talking about G2 and I was asking about the Hunter and why if they're trying to stay around nationality or they're international players.
Now, whatever, I'll pick up roughly where I was anyway.
Yeah,
basically,
sure. Yeah.
The gist is, as far as I can tell, no. Like, they have a bias in the sense that if someone like Nexa can play a role, and I think personally he was only ever there as a stopgap player, mate. I don't think he was there to permanently be like a long-time anchor player or whatever the fuck. So, in my opinion, it's more just like, if you've already worked with someone and you know them, and by the way, in that case, I would also imagine he was very cheap salary-wise to bring in. I don't think he would have been anywhere close to what a JKS was getting paid. I also just think it's something you would do in the short term. But as you say, if you look at the 2 players they've signed now, one's from fucking Guatemala and the other one's from Poland. So that has nothing to do at all with the Balkan region. So, no, I think that angle's been overplayed, basically. It's just unfortunately, maybe you didn't see this, but Overdrive, the Russian leaker, basically tried to accuse Nico a few months back of like making a Balkan team and that it just didn't work or something. Whereas I haven't heard that's the case. I've just heard it's more the idea like they would like one day potentially to play together with a Balkan team, but that's like a pipe dream at the moment. And they know that, it's not the move right now. Like I don't get the vibe they're trying to do that. Again, maybe if they could sign people like Madden again. I mean, by the way, the key thing here is it's different to be open to signing players from that region than to we want the whole team to be from that region, you know?
Yeah.
I get the feeling it's more the former than the latter. Like if you could get someone like Madden from Ents or Falcons, maybe you would. He's a good player. You'd fit your team. But I don't think they're going to like the obvious example is they're not going to get rid of Modesty and replace him with a Balkan AWPA just to be Balkan, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just more so that Hunter and Nico were just good players, so they just picked them as a pair and then put more.
And as I said, if you just look at it, right, the problem people have is, the reason I alluded to all that stuff about Nico leaving is because a lot of fans do have some really old narratives. Like they think, for example, right, this must be Nico's team and he decides everything. Not true as far as I've heard. They think, right, well, Nico and Hunter are cousins, so they have to play together. They're a package deal. It's not even true, bro. I've just said Nico was going to leave to Falcons and Hunter would have been left behind. Then also they think, Hunter, Modesty and Nico have to play together as well. Also not true. It sounds like actually either of them would leave, would have left and gone elsewhere already. And then lastly, they think, you know, like all of them combined again, like some Balkan angle, like obviously it's just fucking Hunter and Pekka and Nico have to be in the team. And it doesn't seem like any of these things are true, quite frankly. So I wouldn't worry about that angle. Like if G2 is bad, it's not for that reason. Put it that way.
Okay, good. So how long has CS2 been out? Is it 1 year or 2 years?
It's not a year yet. I think
Not
it
even
came
a year
out. The
yet.
first event was IEM Sydney last year, so I'm going to guess
Okay.
that would be like September, maybe. I'll double check though. It would be nice to know.
Okay.
I would guess around September. Let me just double quickly check. Right. Oh, actually, IEM Sydney was in October. So the first event was October, because if you remember, the last CSGO event was the Pro League one that Mouse Sports won, where they still had
Okay.
Frozen.
Yeah.
Where they beat that new, when Navi still played, we still had Simple before Wonderful.
Okay. So a lot of the discussion right before CS2 came out was kind of like, would the game cause people to fall off or
Sure.
change the technical aspects
Sure.
and make new players or have old players? And so far from like my observations as a layperson, it didn't seem like everyone transitioned pretty well into CS2. But like, have you noticed anything like where people like Nico is only slightly worse in CS2? But is there anyone that's like come up because of CO2 or like has really fallen off?
I mean, the problem with that one is, like, some of them, it might not just be the game. Like an obvious example, if people remember, is like when Elige was in Team Liquid in CSGO, he wasn't very good. But in CS2, in Complexity, he's amazing. Like, he's legitimately like, I think he's like the 5th best player in the world or something, mate. So, but the problem with that is that could be like two things. It could be both CS2 and obviously in Complexity, he's just the star player, mate. It's built around him. Whereas I think in Liquid, what had happened was he'd gotten to the end of the time where they gave a fuck about him, and instead they were catering to Yekindar, Naf, and people like that instead. So I think it's probably a bit of both on that one. In general, the problem is there are players who've dropped off, but again, it's nearly always, I think, combined with moving teams, etc. And obviously, if you think about this, right, if we were in CSGO and we hadn't changed game and someone moved teams, if the person got worse, your first assumption would probably be, is it the team setup, not are they bad at the game now, right? I think so. The problem is, a lot of the ones I could tell you, people would say that guy's way worse, but it's like, yeah, but also his team setup's different. Like, I'll give you an obvious example, was I think at the end of CSGO, especially in Vitality, Magisk was really good. Like, he was a player where I was used to say I thought he was like better than the stats and the HLTV rating might say. Whereas in Falcons, he is an absolute shadow of himself, mate. He's never ever looked as good as he was in Vitality. But again, you also have to remember he's now playing in CS2, whereas all the Vitality shit was in CSGO. So that's a tricky one on that one. I mean, one that people did actually used to hate on in Falcons as well was Sun Pius. But I actually think if you go and look, he's actually probably been the best player in the team overall. Like, I think in general, he's kept his level. Oh, actually, there's a player in Falcons now, has leveled up loads, by the way. It's Dupree. Believe it or not, Dupree looked shit at the end of CSGO, but in CS2, he's actually been pretty good so far. Like, he's sort of like got his level back to some degree. He'll never be like the old Dupree, because you have to remember, he's also quite old. Like, if I had to guess, he's probably like 32 or something, or 30 or something. Let me double check, actually. I know he's definitely up there, and he's got mad miles on him, but he actually got way better in CS2 than he was at the end of... Yeah, he's 31 years old. So actually, Dupree's a rare example. A weird one, I mean, to be fair, it doesn't matter as much because he was also bizarrely very good on the map Overpass, which has been removed, was Norbert from Virtus Pro, also for some weird reason got way better in CS2 for the first few months. So there was a few. Another one was JT, the in-game leader of Complexity, was a bit better for some reason. No one knows why really, but he used to be thought of as like a really atrocious fragging IGL, and he sort of was like not bad the first few months. So I think there's been a few. I would say the general trend has just been most players got a bit worse. But that makes a lot of sense. You know, the engine's different. You have to adjust to different things. I also think actually the game is a lot more about like gunfighting now than it is like I think in CSGO, especially at the end, you could have teams like Heroics, an obvious example, where they were able to get away with maybe having like a little bit too little firepower, but you could just sort of like outmaneuver teams and tactically outplay them. I think it's really hard to do that in CS2. I think firepower is enormous in this game.
Okay. I think that wraps up CS2, but I want to go to the
yeah, let's go for it.
The Tech Girl podcast you're doing now, and like I think so. That's like a joint venture because you're on it every time.
Yeah,
and
I'm like the co-host.
Yeah. So I guess like and kind of like how did that set up? Because I know you've done like interviews with Tech Girl before this podcast started. And
yeah, I can give you the origin story. So basically, she's someone who has been actually around esports like quite a few years now, but she's one of those people where, because she was doing general like hosting, stage hosting, the problem with those sorts of gigs is you're almost never going to get to start off in a game like League of Legends or CS unless you were from that game for years and years and years and really grinded like Freya and people like that. What's typically happening in esports is you're going to get sort of general work. So as you can see in her career, you'll be doing like PUBG, and then you'll be doing, I don't know, some beat 'em up game, and then you'll be doing like, the odd CS one, but smaller one. And then essentially like the hard thing is to go from that type of work where there's quite a lot of work out there, but you're just working for different TOs, different game devs, different games, even as the circuit moves on and also sometimes you're not even doing big esports summits, you're doing like a smaller one, like a Red Bull one for fun, or you go into a trade show and doing like a 1v1 tournament with a pro. The problem is to make the jump from that to being the person who's like one of the faces of a desk on a broadcast like CS or League of Legends is really hard. And so one of the ways you obviously need to do it is through exposure and the tournament organizer seeing that you're good. So I already had brought her onto like an episode, I think of Snake and Banter or something. And I just noticed like, I actually think she has a load of qualities that are way better than even some of the top people now. Like one is, I think not only is she, this is a mad underrated quality. If you ever listen to her do her like intro to a desk segment, she almost never fucks up. She almost never like trips over her words or says the wrong, like she has really good poise. And then actually, this is a really underrated thing. She can also then do a joke, which is clearly impromptu sometimes in that moment, and also seems to just hold her nerve. So to me, that's obviously the kind of person I would like to work with on an event or on a show. So basically, I reached out to her and I just said, like, we should basically do a show where it's something like, I actually told her, though, I want you to come up with a concept. I said, we should do some sort of show where it's almost like a show to display how good you are at being a desk host and what you would be like if someone hired you for an event. And in this case, it would be like if I was your analyst. But obviously in this case, because it's a podcast, we don't have to do a 2-minute segment. We can do however long you want. And so, but I told her, whatever the concept is, you have to think it up and it has to be something along those lines. But I want you to come up with the ideas, though. So the idea is she's shown that she's engaged, she's done her research, she knows what areas she wants to explore within a topic. And so if you notice, the difference between that and my other shows is I explicitly make her the host of that one. I'm just the co-host. If you notice, I don't even always reply after the other person talks. I sometimes let her specifically ask me so I can see I'm not stepping on her toes much. So I think it's been mega so far, mate. I mean, also look how many fucking episodes we've done. I think she's been grinding on the schedule. And we've done almost like one a week at this point. It's kind of crazy how many she's also done. So I think she's also like really proven herself in terms of how much she's willing to be available to schedule. Whereas there are loads of people in esports who'll do a show if they can, on a certain day if they're free. But it's the difference is the grinders are the ones who make themselves free. So I think it's great so far. What have you thought?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I think it's just the concept of like Feed the Trolls and talking about the narrative, like the Reddit narrative, and
it's a good idea, isn't it? That's all her idea, mate. Good. She came up with all that. Yeah. Same as I also think actually it works that it's just always exactly an hour roughly. There's not too long.
That definitely works. Yeah.
It's great, isn't it? I think what I like is it's so different to what I would do. That's why I told her to come up with a concept. So it's also fun for me to be on because it's different from all my other shows. So I think it works great, mate.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited to see how far you guys go and what she turns it into and stuff. Hope she gets more on the big stuff,
And then at the moment, I am also the one who books the guests, so I think I also am able to essentially that's actually one of my big strengths. A lot of people don't know. Like, spoiler, I'll tell you this right now, mate. If everyone loved that show, The Crackdown with Dom, which everyone did in League, you remember, everyone's loving it. And they always used to say, I would love this show if Thorin wasn't on it. I've got some bad news for you, mate. I booked the guests for that show, so I don't know how that would work. So, when you used to see on that show, when they would have like Caps and Yang, I was getting all those people. So...
yeah.
Interesting how that works. So one of the mad underrated skills, because it's really hard actually, is having like the network of people. And then actually even there's sort of a meta for how you ask people to come on shows. Like, by the way, you don't just go and message like Caps and go, "Dear Caps, would you like to come on my show on Tuesday night?" And then just sit there and hope he replies. Like, that's not a talk. Like, if you were going to get someone like Caps, you would do something like you'd ask him as far out as possible. You'd already have like 2 backups in case he says no. You'd have like a medium-sized person. Then you'd have like a small person who's like, some nobody analyst who will come on at last minute. If it's so tricky to set those things up. So also, I think that's another area so far I've been able to really help her with is like, I think I've done a pretty good job of selecting a mixture of like sometimes big guests and commentators. And then also when it's like a more of a tricky topic, I don't think anyone can talk about, or it's short time frame in terms of turnaround for scheduling, I can also get the smaller people who actually turn out to be interested and maybe you haven't seen on my shows before. So I think we've also done a pretty good job in that sense.
Yeah, so that's part of like why I like Snake and Banter is like you always like you try to get a new guest like every time. There's only so many people that have been there.
I try not to cycle too many.
Times.
Yeah. Like I will do eventually. Obviously, look, they can all, I'm sure they all have great topics, thoughts about new things.
Eventually,
yeah, but I do try to. I try to make it so there's like quite a wide amount of people though, because I mean, a show like that, if you think about it, it's very rare that I bring someone on you've never heard of and it's actually shit. I would say that's only ever happened once or twice, mate. I think most people, as long as you pick the right sort of person, you're usually surprised. You know, this is an interesting angle, or wow, they have some takes I didn't expect. Or, you know, the best angle obviously is maybe they have like a specialty in one little niche area of the industry you don't know about, so they come with a really great take for that or something.
And the format is entertaining enough. Like, you don't need that much personality.
Yeah, I agree.
So, yeah. It's like easy for you and Maui to take their point.
I think that's also, if you notice, something I've tried to do a lot more in these last few years is actually have a concept for some of the shows. Because before the concept was just get on people you like and talk about CS. But if every show is completely free form, they will blur into each other and overlap, and you know you'll be repeating yourself. Whereas I think if you look at it now, all the different shows I do in each game have like their own sort of like angle. And so I think now I've got it pretty much nailed. Like I feel like now I can do 2 or 3 shows in the same game, and I'm not repeating too often.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. Like when Monty says he does like X many podcasts, it's like I do hear him say the same things a couple times. So like when you're trying to follow 6 league podcasts, it doesn't work. You hear the same stuff. But yeah, don't listen to that as much. I just lost my other.
No, it's all good. By the way, it's also why, if you notice, I'll give you a little pro tip of what I do in that sense. It's why, if you notice, if I ever do shows in close proximity, like, for example, let's say I do, at the moment, Summoning Insight is usually, in theory, a day after Best Damn League show, but it can also be a day before sometimes. It depends on the scheduling. If I would do those 2 shows in a week, and then Monty on Summoning Insight tried to talk about LEC, if you ever watch, the difference is, on the Summoning Insight, I would give loads of my own takes, but on Best Damn League show, if I used a lot of my LEC takes, I would actually make it more like I'm leaning more on the guest on Best Damn League show, and I'm more talking about what they want to talk about. So I think Monty does an all right job with it, but it's another thing where like it's its own way of thinking about content. It's got its own skill set. So I actually think almost everyone would struggle if they did more than basically 2 podcasts about the same topic. Yeah. So since I've sometimes had weeks where I've done 3 or 4, I think I've just sort of mastered how to sort of divide up the topics or what angles. Or for example, sometimes I'll even sit down, and if I've already done a show where I talked about all my like default topics, sometimes I'll even sit down for like half an hour before a show and think, what are some angles I haven't talked about with these teams? Or is there like a hypothetical I could bring? And I'll craft some new stuff so there's something fresh to work with still, you know. But I think a lot of people just take for granted that it'll work anyway, because you have to remember the majority of people making content in esports only do 1 show a week max. They're just on 1 podcast. Whereas I'm doing this weird thing where I'm doing like, you know, fucking like 6 a week or something mental.
Yeah.
Depending on, you know, whether League and CS are all rolling at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely, you need to build a skill to make sure that works. 1 podcast is easy enough. 6 is a lot. So I was going to ask if you were thinking about trying to do a hot take point made for League of Legends. Do you have like co-hosts or thoughts about that, or like is that in the works? Or
it's not in the works. The main problem with that is this. It's more something I've just thought about a few times, and I just feel like in the future I'll probably do it. The biggest issue is this though. I don't actually know who could do that show, mate. Like, I'll give you an obvious example. The obvious person I should have as sort of the Maui Snake figure on that show to make the hot takes is actually Keyray from my Discord and EuroLeague. Because he's one of the few people who watches all the leagues, has mad edgy takes, and would say them on camera because he doesn't really have any consequence. He doesn't work in the industry. He's just a fan, right? So I feel like he would be awesome as one of the 3. But the hardest part is who the other industry person is. Because if you think about it, right, on the CS one, I've got Maui Snake, who's sort of playing the Kira role, but he also does analysis work on events because CS is just a more welcoming game. And then we've got Kassad, who's like an industry figure, with like being a coach, being a player, knows everyone, right? The problem is picking the other industry person is really tricky if you do it in League. Like, as much as you might say, for example, like, what about Yamato Cannon? Because he's working on our network now, right? Bro, how often do you hear Yamato Cannon really give an edgy take? I would say not often, like, personally. Never, yeah. Isn't kind of his strength now that he can sort of be in a convo with someone like me or Dom being edgy, but he's sort of like, He's just really good at being polite, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I actually think even though he could do that role, I don't know that it necessarily would suit him or he'd even want to. So essentially the hardest part, Matt, is I think to actually get someone who both could be edgy and would be on this show would be really hard. Because in CS, the premise itself doesn't 100% work, by the way. Even though I called it hot take point made, with the premise being you intentionally come up with hot takes, so how can anyone get mad? Or they do. Like everyone who hates Maui links to that show as though it isn't a hot take show, he's just a dickhead. So the problem you would have is I think a lot of people in League would be really scared to do it and give their real take, mate. Yeah. By the way, the obvious person would have been someone like a Dom. But again, he doesn't want to do more podcasts now, but he's trying to peel back on that shit, if anything.
Yeah.
So it's hard. The problem is, I think it's just way harder to do it in League than it is to do it in CS. And also, even though I think I'm pretty good in League, I myself carry an authority in CS that I'll never have in League of Legends, mate. Right. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, if anything, I'm in CS more like what Monty is in League. Like, they can hate on Monty, but they have to acknowledge once upon a time he was an expert. You know what I mean? Whereas in League, I'll always just have that thing of like, he's just saying any old shit to get attention and the clicks. And they always do that thing. So I also think the third person would have to be like I say, like a big, like that's why a Yamato or a Dom could be that person. Like they have the status where you tune in to hear their takes. But the problem is, at this point, if I approach them, all I'm telling them at this point is, would you like to be hated on even more by Reddit and Twitter? And I think the answer, unfortunately, would be no. Yeah. Like, put it this way, you try yourself. Isn't it hard to think up people who could do it?
Yeah. When you told like the industry and like the analysts, like people like, oh, that's like, because I just think of hot take point made it's Kassad and Maui,
it's easy,
like
exactly.
Professional
yeah,
people.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, no, by the way,
professional background is hard to find.
Here's what's funny is I'll even tell you a little piece of cool info. The original hot take point made didn't have Kassad on it, mate. I won't say who, but there was a different person in the industry who was going to be the third person. In fact, here's a fun detail. The show originally was going to be a Maui Snake show just on our network, a bit like if you see Dom's done that show, The Sackdown, which is him and Yamato doing the crackdown, but without me, basically. So it was going to be like that. I wasn't going to be involved. So what was going to happen was Maui and someone else were going to do a show, and then theirs was just going to be some sort of, again, you figure out the concept after you get the people who want to work on it.
Yeah.
So what happened was I came to them though and said, here's what we do. But I won't say who the other person was, but being as we've got me, well, in this case, we've got Maui and then this other person. I said the obvious thing you should do is do a show concept I've come up with called Hot Take Point Mid, where you intentionally craft spicy takes. And I said, if you want, I'll be the third person. I'll host it. Then what happened was this other person couldn't do it / dropped out. And then at the time, Kassad was just available. And I just realized, actually, this is the obvious person to fucking give a go, isn't it? And I could never know it would work out like it did. Like, I actually think we did sort of catch lightning in a bottle with that. Because obviously the thing we could never know is somehow the relationship between Kassad and Maui is like 70% of the humor of the show, isn't it? Like the way that they're like chalk and cheese, or like Kramer and fucking George outside. Like they just have some weird clash. And if you notice, the reason the show also works is bizarrely, I'm like the uniting force between the two because they each have a positive relationship to me. So it's kind of weird, isn't it? You could never predict that the show would be like that, but it has turned out to be like low-key a bagger, hasn't it?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it's great with especially like the amount of like shenanigans you can get into, and like,
yes,
it's like overly blown, but like if you understand the concept, like it's for fun. It's like, don't take things too seriously.
I even think one of the best things we've done on the show is when we actually like sort of egg each other on to make the take hotter. Like if you remember, there was that take at the end of last year where when Wonderful joined Na'Vi, I was like, I think they'll make the final of one of these two blast tournaments. And then Kassad was basically like, why be a pussy? Why don't you say they'll win? So it was like, well, fuck it then. All right, they'll win then. So, but it does make it spicier for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, the reason I also wanted that show to exist is because I felt like in esports, everyone was going the opposite way by default. Like everyone was getting safer and they were more scared to give a take. And especially they were really scared that they'd have a take and the quote would blow up and it'd be on Reddit and then fans would read it and then they keep referencing it. So I thought to myself, let's do the opposite. Let's just spam the broadcast airwaves with a bazillion hot takes. Some of them will make it so it's not that scary a thing to do because everyone's given a big hot take every few weeks, you know. So I also hope we've actually had a positive influence on CS. Who knows if that's true? I mean, put it this way, I'd say that show already in a weird way became part of the culture if you think about it, because like especially all those HooXi topics, mate. Like that show pretty much like wasn't like half the show about HooXi topics for the last year.
Yeah, it's always
feels like it, right?
Kassad blaming HooXi for a lot of
and
it.
by the way, that take he had, where it wasn't even a hot take, it was just if HooXi doesn't get kicked, I just won't talk to Nico anymore. That still might be the maddest take of all time, even though it's whatever in it. But what a mad take, mate! What a world.
Yeah,
as you say, though, shenanigans, just shenanigans, in it.
Yeah, I think that the CS:GO is like the culture is engaging enough where like you can be more hot takes than League of Legends and stuff, and I think I like the CS content slightly more than the League content because you have like more like slightly more mature audience and people aren't scared. So
sure,
yeah. Let's see. I want to swap to Saudi Arabia and
okay,
that type of stuff. So,
sure.
like, in terms of like esports, like sports washing stuff, and like how much, like, I think like one of my earlier ones we did here, we talked about like, well, how do you boycott something, or like, how do you feel about these things? Like, is it? What I said, I think, was mostly just you can watch the event, just make sure you tell people, or at least you yourself are aware of like the problems and stuff. So like in concept of like sports washing is now like it's a lot, like stuff are getting a bit too much involved now, where like maybe you could separate yourself from like some of the esports stuff. And I think Dom was like disregarded ESWC is what I remember, but I was gone I don't think he watched it. But like, is there like room to boycott Saudi Arabia here in esports? Because it seems like from what you guys talk on Summoning Insight, it's just like, oh, it's just here and like we can't do anything about it as like the community if everyone else is just gonna accept the money.
I mean, I'll ask you a series of questions. So we'll do it like Socrates back in Greece, right?
Yeah.
So here's the problem with this topic. As you've pointed out there, yeah, right now it's just the Esports World Cup, right? So if you just skip the Esports World Cup, you've boycotted them. Successful. The problem is you will have absolutely zero impact on what the Saudis do and whether the Saudis take over everything by not watching. You just yourself won't watch. And if that makes you feel good, that'll make you feel good. It won't save everyone's life. It won't save esports. It won't change anything. But if that makes you feel good, that'll make you feel good. I personally wouldn't do it, but okay, it's a personal choice. So then the next question becomes, are we only doing tournaments? So, for example, you know that in CS2, there is a Saudi team. It's called Falcons, right? Well, spoiler, they were the team that story last year said they were trying to buy that spot that Carmine ended up buying from Astralis. They were going to buy that spot for 30 million or whatever, but Riot apparently blocked it and instead it went to Carmine Corp. I think that was the story. So it's inferred to me that like almost certainly probably the next slot will be bought by maybe Falcons literally or another Saudi org. So then my obvious next question becomes, if we're counting not watching the tournament EWC, should we also, like for example, if there's an LEC team that's sponsored by Saudi, would you have to also skip and would you have to boycott their LEC games? Would you just watch all the other games but not that one? Is that the premise?
No, so I never. I didn't take the take of like not watching it, but like that was like a form of boycotting.
No,
like,
my point is just though. That's what you see what I mean.
Yeah,
like
okay.
as soon as even one team's there, like do I do I only boycott their games and watch all the other games? In which case, by the way, we better hope they're never good because think how shit it would be, for example, if they were the best team and I can watch all the games except for the file of LEC. You know what I mean? So you can see my point here. Like this is just when we've got one team and one TO. If then it becomes so that, like for example, MSI becomes EWC. Well, now suddenly everyone's going to be doing it, aren't they? And there's going to be a major part of the tournament. Then let's say there's 3 teams have bought into LEC that are from Saudi. And then, you know what I mean? You see what I mean? As I pile it up and up and up and up and up and up and up, it's only going to get worse, isn't it? So essentially the problem I have is I just feel like it's somewhat inevitable it's going to take over. So I don't think there is a way you can boycott. Like when people like Richard say to boycott, they mean in the sense of like you'd have to actually have people who have leverage. Like here's the difference. Me and you can't boycott. We're just fucking plebs, mate, watching on the stream. But if, for example, example, Cloud9, Team Liquid, Fnatic, G2, you know what, pick like the top 10 Western orgs. If they'd all said, we are literally boycotting this, I don't know whether that would work, but you can see at least that has like a greater than zero chance, or it can at least delay something, or
at least get the media.
You could do something. Stuff. Yeah, exactly. You could do something. Like I still don't know that it would work in the long run. Maybe the industry still gets bought out. Maybe your org still gets bought out. But I just feel like it's one of those things where this is why people did the Neon protest. It's very easy to like stand against something tiny when it doesn't really affect you that much and it can go away. The problem is like this, like, as you're saying, it's not just like we've got a wave coming towards us. Behind it, you can just see like a tsunami coming. So yeah, I kind of feel like if you don't want to get wet, you get the fuck out the ocean at this point in time. You will drown, in that analogy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when we talk about like the esports monetary system, is that like the fans have been taken out of it because they're just free viewers, right?
Yep.
So they don't have any leverage. So like if we try,
I mean, you could argue that's why the Saudis are here, right? It's because the fans won't fucking pay anything, right?
Yeah. So the thing is, like, if we had leverage, or like people wanted to pay for esports, then like you could have a boycott by like running a separate TO with a pay-per-view. And that
it's why I actually had a comment like this on Somebody Inside, but everyone just ignored me, sadly, which is, wouldn't that even be the ultimate way to show whether people actually do give a fuck about LGBTQ stuff, right? Make us, like, you know, make a separate tournament, make it so it's a non-Saudi one, and make the whole thing that it's funded by fans so that we don't have to use Saudi shit. Like, I think that would be a very interesting, put it this way, again, it wouldn't even have to succeed, mate. Just as a political statement, wouldn't that be interesting? Like, what if you raised a decent amount of money? Wouldn't that infer something about the industry, and maybe there is a pay-per-view model? But as you notice, not only is no one interested even in that idea talking about it, nobody's even thinking about doing that, mate, I'm afraid. Like, that's not even on the table, I'm afraid.
We're just unique people thinking about it here, then.
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, the real issue is nobody gives a fuck about Saudi Arabia, mate. They all just want the money. They're not really sitting down like, oh, this is really hurting my morals, and oh, I'm such a quandary. What they're doing is sitting down going, right, we've got that money, so how do we message it so we get the least a blowback on social media? Like, everyone's very cynical now in the industry, in my opinion. I actually think the real effect of the Saudi money hasn't been anything you would think on the surface. It's just that it's exposed that no one ever gave a fuck about any of this shit. It really was just some weird PR stuff. Like, it's why the funniest angle, if you think about it, was, remember the old angle people used to make fun of companies for the pride stuff, was that if they had an office in the Middle East or Asia, they wouldn't do it on those accounts, but they would do it on the Western account. You know that famous premise? Well, the problem is, it turns out that just is how all these companies operated. They never actually cared about gay people, for example. They just cared about, is this an area in which it's fine to be gay and no one thinks it's negative, in which case, pretend we're for it. Oh, wait, are we in a different area where it's actually considered negative and people don't like it? Don't mention it then. So if anything, they've actually in a way been very consistent, Matt. It's just that in the West, people bought into what they were seeing at surface level and thought, wow, these are what they believe in. But it never was. They were just cynically doing whatever they thought played best in that region.
Yeah. We need more people to be moral actors and not virtue signalers. We'll see
or go the other way. You can also just be a non-moral actor and just shut the fuck up. You do that too.
Yeah, but then Saudi Arabia takes over your scene, right?
Yeah, true.
Yeah. All right. What about LPL? So I haven't been able to watch any LPL. So what are the best teams, or like what?
Oh, I'll give you the lowdown.
What's the shit?
The main problem you have with the LPL is a bit of a bomber, which is you have a bunch of teams that have risen up, but they're probably not like true championship contenders. And then some of the teams that have slipped down were some of the better squads. So the biggest bomber of all is this. NIP is pretty bad now. They're pretty bad now, mate. Like, you know, they really were. Like, they were on the cusp of like, they were starting to look like they really were the third best team at one point, or the fourth, but you know, they were like going to be, in fact, the obvious hope if you're a rookie fan is, just get the last world spot. As of right now, they would never get the last world spot, mate. There's way too many teams would beat them. The whole team almost has collapsed. Like, Fortic has been having some nightmare games. Aki and Shanji are just a little bit whatever. Even Rookie's had some bad games. He's had some int games himself. So the whole team's collapsed. Meanwhile, some of the teams that were shit in the last split, like LNG's the obvious one, but Weibo's one as well. Some of these teams have had like a mad resurgence, believe it or not. Like, they've just suddenly come alive. Like, LNG did the move where they got in Wei. They just look way better as a team. Just leveled up. The Weibo one was always weird because their lineup on paper was always, they've got Tarzan, if you don't know, who used to be on LNG. He's actually starting to have some decent games again. They're sort of gradually getting it together. Top Esports was really good. They just had that like classic MSI hangover where you're just not as good for the first 2 weeks afterwards. Billy actually was looking shit. If you saw WC, they were really bad there, but they've sort of like gradually started to get it back together. Most of their players are nowhere near Springs level though. Like if you did like the All Pro now, dude, I'd be surprised if anyone from Billy get their first place. I feel like right now none of them would get first. I mean, they've even been swapping out fucking Jun as the jungler, believe it or not. So some of the top teams are in a weird spot. And then the biggest shock of all is Anyone's Legend. Because what happened is Tarbe went to Anyone's Legend and he's done his magic again, bro. Like that's now a team that's actually been like contending with like quality squads, you know.
Yeah, none of those players look like have big names. It's just like Ale from like a year ago.
Yeah, there's just Ale from EDG, and then if you remember, Cryin used to be on like RNG way back. No, sorry, I'm picking the wrong team here. Who am I thinking of? Oh, Shanks. Oh, sorry, that's the player. Yeah. Yes, Shanks is the player who was on WE. Sorry, a few years back, he was pretty good. Croco was on an LCK team and wasn't even that good.
Yeah.
No, here's the thing. It's like one of those ones where like none of the players are bad. They have like underrated value, but the target guy just must be an amazing coach, mate. I mean, it seems like he has the Midas touch. Every time he joins these teams, they just get like twice as good immediately, it feels like.
Yeah. What else is Tabe? Where was he before this and stuff?
I mean, if you remember, he was on BLG last year, and then they broke the record for wins in the LPL. Yeah. He basically joined in the spring around like the playoffs when they did the glow up and became the second best team. So he had that one. If you remember before that, he was working with RNG a few years ago.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
He's had some mega fucking runs in his career, mate. Yeah.
Yeah. And then was Tabe was also like the guy who actually leaked strats like in 2015.
He did. I mean, put it this way, that's not even against his character. He's just a bit of an attention whore. So I think he just did that because in the moment he didn't think about like how BM that was.
Yeah, but that was like 2016 or something. Right?
It was quite a while ago now.
A long time ago, yeah. But he's been active in league for a long time, right?
I mean, he's the one who played in the season 3 finals against T1.
Okay.
He was HooXi I's lane partner. He was dog shit as a sport, by the way, but he was HooXi I's lane partner back then, yeah. So he's got a mega tenure.
Yeah, I started watching League, I think, season 4, so I caught the end of the season 3 World Championship, so.
Yeah.
But yeah. Pretty crazy coach to do that with that team.
Everyone needs a support network, and mine is, of course, my Patreon community, the Scrominati, who, in many ways, they're the Sonny to my Cher, saying, I got you, babe. So this video and all the others on my channel were kindly supported by the following names: Ahmed Hadjou, Mac Pugnatio Rajcula, Adam Tomlin, Animosity, Jensen Goh, Tosh, Toucan, and you know it. Jerky's Minion, my main man, always going to be referenced, one of the best patrons of all time. Would you like to ask a question in my AMA? Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest to say on my channel? Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming Reflections and Talk to Thorin interviews are. Maybe you want to do one of those long discussions where you get to set the topics we talk about. Well, if any of these or others appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Scluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.